public safety ventures. And yet, this particular intrusion into the state really was done solely by them without coordination. And that has created, I think, a public safety mess for our state and something that I think we should all be concerned about.
Well, that's significant. So they are not reaching out to try to coordinate an action. It sounds like from your testimony, if I'm correct, it's only when it gets a crisis situation because it's out of control, that they had lost control, then they call for help from the police. Please help us. We're messing this operation up.
I think, Senator, that's precisely, I think, what we have seen over the course of time is that as things became more crisis-oriented after the two shootings, the two deaths, then there was this need for collaboration and securing ICE agents and even the local ICE facility in Minneapolis.
Okay. So lack of attempt to even coordinate at the front end is a significant problem, and I hear you. Attorney General Ellison, I'm going to ask you another related question to that coordination. Can you describe the coordination between DHS or DOJ with the state and local officials into the investigations of the tragic shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy?
We haven't had any Senator, we haven't had any cooperation up until now, which is really unusual because in prior cases where there's been a federal and state interest in a crime, we've seen collaboration between federal and state authorities. It's how we normally do work. It's not unusual at all. And in fact, this situation, when we were told you can't have access to the evidence, to the crime scene, that was highly unusual and surprising to us. And so we're hoping that we can gain cooperation, perhaps in the Preddy matter, but we've been advised that the good matter is the feds are not investigating it, and we still haven't received any access to the evidence that is involved in that case. So it's an unusual, strange situation, but we're with good faith, hoping that things will change.
So that's important. You're saying in the past they've worked with you or other folks.
Yeah.
But in these two cases, they're stonewalling you?
That's a yes. That's a yes.
Wow. Well, Commissioner Schnell, as a former local police chief, as I mentioned earlier, is cutting out law enforcement, cutting out local law enforcement a common and effective way to actually conduct an investigation?
Senator, no. I think, the operations, as the Attorney General pointed out, of close collaboration and sharing of evidence. And we saw that in rather significant cases where there was both a local investigation and prosecution, as well as a federal investigation and prosecution in other cases. So, I think as we look at the public safety of Minnesota, the public safety of our country, collaboration between law enforcement and focus and targeted enforcement on issues of critical importance, whether that's human trafficking or large-scale drug interdictions, these things need to continue, and we need to get back on track for those matters. And I think that's where success can happen. That's where success has happened in collaboration, but that's not what's happening currently as we see in Minneapolis and Minnesota.
Okay. So the next question is to both of you. This administration has basically demanded that Minnesota state and local agencies use their extremely limited resources to basically subsidize DHS operations, is what we're hearing. Now, this is despite DHS receiving well over $100 billion from the Republican spending bill to conduct the kinds of operations we're seeing on these streets. So given recent reporting that only 14% of arrests made by DHS are individuals with a criminal record, would you say this is a good use of those limited state resources that you have to protect the people on the streets of your local communities, to help ICE round up mothers on their way to work or children getting off the school bus, or should you be using that to fight crime on your streets and making the people safe in your communities? And how does that strain your ability to provide public safety for the residents that you serve? Attorney General Ellison, you want to take the first stab?
Yeah, well, Senator, crime in Minnesota and in Minneapolis has been going down. We're grateful for that, but we still need every resource we can to protect public safety. And the fact is, resources are very limited. I think that given the proper circumstances, legal cooperation makes sense, but we simply don't have the state budget to be deputized to carry out functions that are reserved constitutionally to the federal government. That's their business. We have our business, and where we can work together, that's a good idea, but we simply cannot just convert our resources over to the federal government.
So,
Senator, I simply can't imagine how many dollars have been spent in Operation Metro Surge. It's staggering. The cost of human life, as well as just the actual financial resources, is hard to even imagine, especially when we look at the numbers that we're talking about. When we look at what is happening operationally, it becomes hard to understand. And certainly taking resources away from the local community would be contrary to public safety in our state. And I think it's also important to say that, we didn't ask for this level of assistance. I think we have seen crime go down in our state. And this certainly has not been ultimately beneficial to the safety of our state.
thank you.
Senator Johnson.
So a lot of what we heard here today literally makes no sense. When you look at the history of returns and removals, the Obama administration, first Trump administration, you have to kind of throw out Biden. It was such an aberration. Obama, on average, they returned and removed about 650,000 people a year. Trump in his first term, about 500,000. It's lower than Obama. This first year, there have been a little under 600,000 returns and removals. That's a lot, but it's not a whole lot when you realize we flooded who knows how many, at least probably 10 million people, if not more, during the Biden administration, and created this enormous mess. By the way, including that, according to DHS, 650,000 criminals that are at large. They're not detained. 15,000 murderers. 20,000 people convicted of sexual assault. I mean, that's the mess that the Democrat and President Biden's open border policy created that the Trump administration is trying to clean up. But they deported close to 600,000 people under this administration, and in most states and most cities, there aren't protests. There aren't protesters being shot. Obviously, problems in Los Angeles, probably Portland. These places that claim to be sanctuary cities, it sounds like Attorney General Ellison is denying the fact that, we cooperate with ICE. I think Representative Niska wouldn't agree with that. So again, I'm trying to square this circle going, this doesn't make sense to me. I wish we had the government officials here, DHS officials, our next panel on this one, just to refute this, to rebut it. We had a very interesting hearing last week on the fraud in Minnesota, and we had State Senator Mark Cron. And in his testimony, he was talking about local reports of something like 30,000, they call them observers, being trained. Okay, I thought that was an incredible figure. I'm not saying there actually were, but it certainly sounds that there are activists being trained. Are you aware of training for activists, Mr. Ellison, in Minnesota? That some of these protesters literally went through training. There are groups out there providing training. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I mean, it's common for people to use their First Amendment right to protest things that they don't believe are right.
Were you aware of the
First Amendment activity, sir?
Yeah. Were you aware of the signal chats? I believe it was the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota was actually helping manage one of those signal chats that were deploying those trained activists to the legal law enforcement actions. Or were you aware of that signal chat that was being used to deploy those people?
I'm aware it exists, but this is First Amendment activity, sir. Okay, this is something that the law.
Did you ever encourage people to go out there and exercise the First?
Yeah, I do.
Right?
I freely admit being in favor of the First Amendment.
You encourage trained activists to put themselves into harm's way because you had to know, because you were watching this,